Thank you, Mr. Chair, and honorable members of the committee. Sorry for my lack of coat and tie. I'm actually halfway through my honeymoon, but this is just too important of an issue, so I wanted to be able to join. Thanks for the privilege to be able to speak today. Out of respect for your packed schedule and my wife's patience, I'll move quickly. So greetings from the future. As Charlie mentioned previously, I'm the legislative director for a housing advocacy group in California. In California, the median home price is 8 times the median household income. The typical family has absolutely no path to homeownership whatsoever. Half of all renters spend a third of their income on rent, and a third or so of renters spend half of their income on rent. So half of their paycheck going right down the drain on the first of every month. And then, of course, somewhat infamously, California has over 200,000 people sleeping in cars and tents and shelters every single night. This crisis that California faces in its most extreme form is not inevitable. On the contrary, it was the result of a half century of policy designed to make it hard to build housing. We have local zoning regulations that make it hard to build the range of housing typologies that the state needed. We had infamously slow permitting. It could take months, if not years, sometimes to get a permit. And we have a host of unfunded mandates that increases the cost of housing. So we're now to a point where a mere 10 years ago, the state projected continued population growth. We're now to a point where we'll be doing good to hold our population, and the destruction of communities is hard to overstate. But so why am I speaking to you today? Well, I was very lucky to have grown in a very different state. I'm an 8th generation Kentuckian. This is a photo of my dad and I in front of my parents' first home in Lexington, purchased in the early 90s. They purchased this home for $68,000. My dad had just gotten a job for one of the Toyota suppliers in Georgetown. At the time, the median home in Lexington was 2.5 times the median household income. Even adjusting for inflation today, the home they bought would have been $151,000. We'd be incredibly lucky to have more homes like this. As I'll mention, today the median home is over 5 times that amount. The median home is twice what my parents paid for this humble starter home at around $324,000, even adjusting for inflation. Unfortunately, this Kentucky that I grew up in and many of the folks here had the privilege to grow up in is rapidly disappearing, and it's looking more and more like California. This is a home price index of homes in California. This gray bar here toward the right end of the chart was supposed to be a historic run-up in home prices that changed everything, and now I regret to say we're at the far end of this chart. We've seen an incredible run-up in housing prices. Best way to solve a crisis is an early diagnosis. And I think we have the flexibility here to make that. In rapidly growing cities like Lexington and Bowling Green, the median home price is now over 5 times the median household income. Louisville had the 5th highest rent increases in the country last year, and rent burdens across the state continue to rise. And then homelessness continues to rise year over year coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the homelessness is actually increasing most rapidly in rural areas, which is a relatively new phenomenon. What's driving this crisis? We know it's underbuilding, and here's a profile of permitting Kentucky relative to its peers: North Carolina, Tennessee, Arkansas, Indiana. Anytime a statistic would come out, my mom, who's from Martin County, right across the border from West Virginia, would always say, "Thank God for West Virginia," because they'd always do a little bit worse than us. And consistent with that, West Virginia is underbuilding, but they're not having nearly the economic revitalization that Kentucky's having. Relative to some of our peers like Tennessee and North Carolina, Kentucky is building significantly less housing. We know that those cities and metro areas that have been building housing over the last few years have seen rents fall or even stabilize, home prices fall or stabilize, and they're remaining affordable. Unfortunately, many of Lexington's metro areas are not among the list of places that are seeing prices stabilize or fall. On the contrary. These crises are going to kick into overdrive as jobs continue to come to the state. We've already got a crisis that's affecting folks who already live here. And if we continue to attract employers, which is a very good problem to have, that crisis is going to get even worse if we don't build enough housing. The good news is we know the cure, and a lot of the cure is entirely free. So we have to reform the California-style zoning regulations that make it impossible to build housing in California or in Kentucky. We have to deal with these ad hoc discretionary review processes that add delays and unpredictability to the process. And we have to address the unnecessary cost drivers that are untethered from health and safety considerations that nonetheless increase the cost of housing. It's the NIMBY phenomenon that has so destroyed so many other states and made it affordable. So I'm going to reinforce a lot of what my colleague Charlie mentioned, that it's important for the state to take the lead on this. This is a statewide crisis requiring statewide solutions. In many cases, the zoning and permitting powers that are being abused and misused by local governments, cities, or counties were delegated by the states. And it's important for state legislators to place guardrails on commonly abused regulatory powers and to scale up best practices. Other peer states, as I'll highlight, are leading, and I'd like to see Kentucky lead on this as well. Just emphasizing the sweep of the reforms that are happening at the state level. After about 100 years of this being an exclusively local power, we've gotten ourselves into a situation where there's a nationwide housing crisis. More and more states, including Kentucky, start to look like California when it comes to housing affordability. But we're also seeing more and more state governments step up and scale up strong reforms. The beautiful thing about this reform space, I think, is that it's not especially partisan. It's not especially ideological. Mayor of New York City, Fiorello LaGuardia, once said, there's no Republican or Democratic way to pick up trash. You've got a housing shortage. There's not really an alternative solution to building a lot more housing. We're seeing solutions in red states and blue states alike. The way they talk about the issue might be different, but the solutions are broadly the same. So I'll talk about a few outstanding examples from states that I think are good peers for Kentucky and ready out-of-the-box solutions that could be carried over to the Commonwealth. So the first is it's going to be really, really key to allow for single-family starter homes. And those are going to be homes on smaller lots. I'll talk about this a little more in a coming slide. Texas SB 15 is a great comp for that. Removing prohibitions on housing in commercial areas and allowing for mixed-use communities or allowing for a variety of communities or underutilized land to be used. Allowing for missing middle housing typologies, as Montana did with SB 323, and then empowering homeowners to build accessory dwelling units. Minimum lot sizes are key. One of the main drivers of the cost of a home is the land. And I often hear local elected officials say, well, we can't build any more housing because we've run out of land. At a certain point, you can reduce this cost by allowing developers to use land more efficiently. Many homeowners might say, or prospective homeowners might say, well, I'd be happy with a smaller home on a smaller lot if it's near a job center or a school or a park or other amenity. In Texas, this has been deployed for decades, allowing for smaller homes that fit the budget of families today. We say starter homes, and I think a lot of folks imagine a single family home on a 7,500 square foot lot. A starter home in 2025 might be a townhouse, might be a unit in a duplex, it might be a home on a 2,500 square foot lot. The Florida example is interesting because Florida, like so many other states, was dealing with a common problem of strip malls that were sitting empty in an age of e-commerce, and then office parks that were sitting half occupied in an age of higher rates of remote work. And what they said, well, we can kill two birds with one stone. We've also got a workforce housing shortage. The Live Local Act provided some minimal property tax abatement in exchange for workforce housing, and then set a reasonable statewide framework that allowed for multifamily housing that's inherently much more affordable at a market rate without any necessary subsidy to be built on some of these lots. And if it's done right, I think it actually enriches the community, enriches the quality of life for the folks who already live there. You take what might be a dead or dying corridor and turn it into a new town center. Many states have legalized what's called missing middle housing. And to the committee members' previous question, building new housing in existing communities can be tricky. Folks get used to the way things are around them, and that's totally reasonable. The problem is that if we never build any new housing, if we don't build any new buildings, then the character of the community will change in a meaningful sense. Folks will get priced out. Only wealthier and wealthier folks will be able to live there. Young families won't be able to live in our communities, even if all the buildings around them change. But you still have to be sensitive to folks' expectations. And one of the nice things about missing middle housing or low-rise housing ranging from duplexes up to live-work units is that they respect the low-slung character of our existing communities, bringing back online inherently affordable typologies like a cottagecore or townhouses that are going to be key for ending the Kentucky housing crisis. I don't have a lot of nice things to say about housing affordability in California, but one of the exceptional things that we have done in recent years has been legalizing accessory dwelling units, otherwise called granny flats or mother-in-law units. And these empowered homeowners to add an additional new unit to their unused garage, basement, attic. Nobody had to do it. It was purely voluntary. But what we've seen since approximately 2017 has been over 100,000 ADUs built. That's pretty remarkable. That's 100,000 new homes, providing homeowners with an additional source of revenue, potentially providing a space for a young adult child or an aging parent to stay close, or even just a new unit to rent out and have an additional source of revenue, all while providing new and additional housing for renters as well. It's all well and good if the zoning allows for the housing, but if it takes months or even years of unpredictable permitting to get a permit, it might as well not be legal. Making sure that your permitting is fast and predictable is one of the easiest things that the state of Kentucky could do, and setting a clear statewide standard here would be really valuable. As Charlie mentioned, allowing for third-party professionals to conduct permit reviews and inspections has spread across states like Tennessee, Florida, and Texas. We're working on a bill on this in California. It's tougher going, but we're going to get it over the finish line. Prohibiting vague standards. You often read a lot of these zoning codes, and you would think, well, okay, I'll open up the rule book, see what the rules are, and if I follow the rules, I'll get my permit. The trouble is the standards are often quite vague, so tightening up some of those standards. Finally, prohibiting downzonings or prohibiting cities from arbitrarily changing the rules in the middle of the game, taking away property owners' property rights or their ability to build on their land. One of the big things that we've seen over the past 10 or so years has been the dramatic increase in how long it takes to build housing. And some of that's due to supply constraints or building material constraints with the disruptions around the pandemic. Some of that's due to labor market disruptions. But a lot of that's due to local governments just moving slower and not issuing permits or not doing so in a more predictable way. You would think this is crazy. Whenever I describe this policy area to folks, I think they're often surprised. In many cases, the actual rules that are regulating new housing development are never really written down. And they're up to a committee, or they're up to a bureaucrat, or they're up to somebody who might not even be appointed or elected. Passing laws that require the rules to be clearly stated up front, I think, is essential. Then the last is costs. Again, it's all well and good if the zoning allows the housing. It's all well and good if you can get a permit promptly. But if it doesn't pencil, it's not going to get built. There are a lot of aspects of this issue that you all don't control. You don't control interest rates. You might not control tariffs on construction materials or construction labor supply. But there are a lot of things that the state government and by proxy local governments do control. Costly building material mandates that force housing to use more expensive materials, even when a cheaper material that's fully safe might have done the job. Arkansas's SB 170 preempted those rules and allowed for flexibility in building materials. Allowing for HUD code manufactured housing in any context where housing exists. Manufactured housing has a bad stigma. A lot of folks in my family live in manufactured housing. Modern manufactured housing is nothing like, I think, when the stigmas were developed. It's safe, it's energy efficient, and yet local governments often discriminate against manufactured housing. Many states have adopted laws preempting that and providing an even playing field. Amending the state building code to allow to reduce costs associated with high building code mandates. North Carolina and Tennessee have done a lot of work on this, and I'm happy to talk more about that. And then preempting local mandates that don't serve any health or safety basis, but serve to limit the supply of housing, such as parking mandates. Does this look like a terrible home? Does this look like a home that should be illegal? Well, in many jurisdictions across the country, prohibition on vinyl siding or various forms of siding, or a mandate that the home be surrounded by masonry would practically make this home illegal, or require that it use a form of siding that would increase the cost by $10,000, $15,000. Should this home be illegal? It looks quite nice to me. I think it's precisely this form of starter home that a lot of folks would love to have. This is mostly manufactured housing. It's mostly built in a factory and it's put down on the site. You wouldn't know the difference, maybe, unless you'd been told. And yet again, this is a form of housing that local rules often arbitrarily discriminate against. Giving consumers flexibility is key. Many jurisdictions impose rules that have nothing to do with health or safety, such as high parking mandates. Now, of course, many households might want to pay more to make sure that they have a parking space guaranteed, even in an urban context, but you might have folks who want to live in an existing job center or along a bus route that takes them to work, or it might be a senior or someone with a disability who, for whatever reason, can't own a car. And yet, in many cases, local zoning codes mandate the provision of loads of off-street parking. If you have one parking space per bedroom required or two parking spaces per unit, as the chart on the right shows, you might be forcing that family to consume as much space in parking as they do in living space. Again, most families are going to want to pay more for parking, but to my mind, the most important thing we could be doing in a housing crisis is to give families the power to make that choice about trade-offs. I would flag too, these rules often make it illegal to adaptively reuse historic properties. If you were to take one of these and turn it into ground floor retail with apartments on top, with conventional parking rules, you might have to demolish the adjacent structure. I'd like to see more Kentucky downtowns revitalized, and these rules often stand in the way. In addition to the fantastic work that Charlie's doing with the Mercatus Center, and Bluegrass Institute's doing a lot of great work on this, we put together model legislation that distills some of the best ideas at a group that I'm working with, the Metropolitan Abundance Project. So I'm happy to talk about that. And just to sum up, I'd like to see Kentucky jump to first in line on this issue. I'm personally invested in the state getting its housing crisis under control. I've been living in California 5 years, and I've seen what happens when this is allowed to fester, and I desperately don't want this for my home state. There are a lot of best practices that have already been proven in other peer states. The state's going to have to play an important role in encouraging local governments through a mixture of carrots and sticks to plan for growth, rather than not just constantly come up with a reason to say no to everything. And I would encourage members of this committee to think big. Zoning's been around for about 100 years. It's not achieved the results that we would like on many margins, and I would encourage folks to think big about what we want land use regulations to do and how we get them better in line with our state's challenges. So again, thank you for the privilege to be able to speak, and I'll be happy to take any questions.